Selka had one job that night: keep the ceremonial lamps burning until the moon goddess made her choice. She knelt at the far edge of the great hall, her fingers smelling of oil and smoke, invisible among the ranked lords and generals who had come to watch a king be crowned. The Alpha King stood at the center of it all, veil of ironhide, broad-shouldered and cold-eyed, already wearing the weight of a throne he believed was his by blood. Every elder in the hall believed it too. Then the moonlight moved. It did not fall on Vale. It did not fall on any lord or warrior or high-born wolf in that room. It crossed the stone floor in a slow, deliberate line, past the banners, past the kneeling nobility, and settled on Selka, a lamp servant, a girl with oil-stained hands and no family name worth speaking. She had no idea what that light meant. She had no idea that the name whispered in the oldest Nightshade records, the Moon Guide, the one who could either seal a king's reign or shatter it, was hers. And she had absolutely no idea that the Alpha King, standing 20 feet away in the sudden silence, had just become the most dangerous person in her world. The silence in the great hall lasted maybe 3 seconds, then it broke like a bone. Elder Ovid was the first to speak. He was a tall man, pale-haired, with the kind of stillness that made you feel watched even when he wasn't looking at you. He stepped forward from the line of council members, his robes brushing the stone floor, and his voice came out measured and very quiet. "The mark is a forgery," he said, "or a manipulation. The moon goddess does not choose servants." No one disagreed, not out loud, but Selka felt the shift in the room, the way 20-some pairs of eyes moved from the glowing mark on her collarbone to the Alpha King, waiting to see what he would do. She pulled her collar up with one hand. Her fingers were shaking, and she hated that they were shaking because she had survived 3 years in that keep by being invisible, and right now she was the most visible thing in this room. Vale hadn't moved. He stood at the center of the throne room, arms at his sides, and she could feel the stillness coming off him, the way you feel heat off a fire controlled but enormous. He looked at Elder Ovid for a long moment. "You're saying the goddess made a mistake," Vale said. "I'm saying someone may have taken advantage of." "That's the same thing." His voice didn't rise. It didn't need to. "Choose your next sentence carefully, Elder." Ovid chose silence, but his eyes cut to Lord Thane standing near the far wall, and something passed between them, quick, clean, the kind of look that had already decided something before the meeting started. Selka caught it. She filed it away. The council deliberated for less than an hour, which told her everything. Decisions made that fast weren't deliberation, they were performance. The formal ruling came through a grey-robed steward who read it off a rolled parchment. Without looking up, the woman bearing the unverified moon mark was to be held in the East Tower, pending investigation into the mark's origins, its legitimacy, and any possible threat to the stability of the Ironhide throne. Pending investigation. She almost laughed. She'd been a lamp servant. She'd carried oil and trimmed wicks and slept on a cot in a storage room off the main corridor. The idea that she was a threat to a throne was so far outside her understanding of herself that it landed more like absurdity than fear. And then she thought, but they believe I am, and that's worse. Because people who believe you're a threat don't wait for proof. They move first. Vale overruled the council before the steward finished rolling the parchment back up. He did it quietly with 2 sentences, and the kind of authority that didn't ask for agreement. Selka would not be held in the East Tower. She would be kept in the king's own wing, under his protection, until the matter was resolved. She should have felt relief. She didn't. He walked her to the wing himself, 2 guards trailing at a respectful distance. The corridor was long lit by iron wall sconces, and her footsteps were too loud against the stone. He didn't speak until they reached a set of dark wooden doors, and he pushed one open and gestured her inside. The room was warm. There was a fire already going. The bed was the largest she'd ever seen. "You'll be safe here," he said. She looked at the room, then at him. "From the council," she said. A long beat. "Yes. And who keeps me safe from you?" He didn't flinch. She'd half expected him to. Instead, he looked at her the way you look at something that surprised you. not offended, just recalibrating. She could feel the pull even now, that strange gravitational thing that had started the moment the mark appeared, and she hated it. She didn't want to feel pulled toward him. She wanted to feel nothing, or at least to feel it on her own terms. "That's a fair question," he said. "I know it is." He stepped back from the doorway. "The door locks from the inside. I won't enter without your permission." He paused. "I know what this looks like. A king pulling a woman out of one room and into another. I know that's not nothing." She said nothing. She was watching him the way she'd learned to watch powerful men, looking for the gap between what they said and what their hands did, what their eyes did, what they did when they thought no one was paying attention. "Good night, Selka," he said. He left. The door closed. She stood in the warm room with the fire going, and the enormous bed, and the lock she could turn from the inside, and she thought the East Tower would have been a cage. And this, she looked at the carved ceiling, the thick rugs, the window with its iron latch. This was a cage too, a better one, a warmer one. One where the door locked from her side, which was something, which was not nothing. But she'd been in this keep long enough to know that the most dangerous rooms were the ones that didn't look like cells. She crossed to the window. Outside, the courtyard was dark. Somewhere below, she could see the flicker of torches, where the council's men were still moving, still talking, still deciding things about her life that she hadn't been invited to decide herself. She pressed her fingers against the cold glass. She wasn't free, she was just owned by someone different now. The castle walls had never felt so thin. Selka lay in the chamber Vale had given her, high in the North Tower, guards posted outside, and she couldn't shake the feeling that safety and imprisonment were the same thing, wearing different masks. He'd pulled her from the Great Hall before the other lords could make their move. She'd seen it in their eyes, hunger. Not the kind that fed on flesh, but the kind that fed on power. A long moment passed before the knock came. Not Vale. The woman who entered had Sarah's face, but her shoulders had stiffened in a way Selka hadn't seen before. Sarah closed the door and leaned against it, breathing hard. "They're coming for you tonight," Sarah whispered. "Not all of them. Lord Thane and his allies. They've been planning this since the moment you arrived." Selka sat up. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because Vale doesn't know yet. And because—" Sarah stopped. Her jaw tightened. "Because I can't be part of what comes next." The words hung between them. Selka could feel the weight of something unspoken, something Sarah wanted to say but couldn't quite reach. Before she could ask, Sarah was gone, the door closing softly behind her. The night came fast, too fast. Selka heard the commotion, first shouts in the courtyard, the crash of something heavy against stone. She moved to the window. Torches. Men on horseback, at least a dozen riding hard toward the castle gates. Not an army. Something worse, a hunting party. She didn't wait for an explanation. The castle was in chaos, servants running guards scrambling to block the main entrance. Selka slipped into the shadows of the corridor and made her way down, her pulse hammering. The great hall was empty, except for Elder Ovid, who stood rigid near the throne, watching the commotion through the open doors, with an expression she couldn't read. "They want you alive," he said quietly, not turning. "That's the only thing keeping them from burning the castle down." "Who sent them?" "Thane didn't act alone. There are other packs, other alphas who've heard about the Moon Guide. A girl who can heal what should stay broken. A woman who can legitimize any throne she chooses to stand beside." He turned to face her now, and his eyes were old and heavy. "You understand what you are to them, don't you? Not a person. A key." Thunder rolled across the sky outside. No rain, just the sound of the storm gathering. "Vale will fight them," Selka said. "Vale will fight them," Elder Ovid repeated, as if tasting the words. "Yes, he will. But you need to know something before this night is over. When Vale's predecessor ruled, when Ironhide held the Alpha King's seat, there was a power they called Nightshade, a gift of the wolves, something that had only appeared once in 1,000 years. The old records say it could unmake what was made, that it could break bonds that should never be broken and break those who wielded it." He paused. Ironhide concealed the truth about Nightshade. Vale doesn't know what happened to it, or why the knowledge was buried. What does that have to do with me? That's the question everyone is asking tonight. Some think you're Nightshade reborn, others think you're something else entirely. But they all think you're dangerous, and they're all right. The sound of fighting grew louder. Vale's voice cut through it, a roar that didn't sound quite human, followed by the screams of men who'd realized too late that they'd come for something that could tear them apart. Selka moved toward the doors, but Elder Ovid caught her arm. Stay inside the castle. Stay away from the courtyard. Whatever Nightshade is, whatever you are, don't let them capture you. Don't let them study you. And don't let anyone convince you that your power is a gift from the moon. She pulled free and ran toward the sound of the fighting. By the time she reached the courtyard, it was nearly over. Vale stood in the center of the chaos, half-shifted blood on his hands and face. The men who'd come for her were either dead or fleeing on horseback, disappearing into the darkness beyond the gates. He turned and saw her. For a moment something shifted in his expression. Relief, rage, something that looked almost like fear. "You shouldn't be here," he said. "They came for me." "I know." A long silence stretched between them. Selka could feel the bond pulling at her, that wordless knowing that he would have died defending her. But she also felt the lie beneath it. He'd hidden something about Nightshade, about her power, about what she really was. "You knew they were coming," she said quietly. "That's why you brought me here." Vale didn't answer. He didn't have to. The truth was written in the way he wouldn't meet her eyes. She ran. Behind her, the great hall dissolved into chaos. Voices, raised feet, thundering across stone. But what made her legs move faster was not the noise. It was the pull. The bond, like a rope, cinched around her chest, yanking her toward the Alpha King, even as every rational part of her screamed that he might be the very reason her sister was gone. Vale caught her wrist before she reached the courtyard gate. His grip was firm, but not cruel. And the moment his skin touched hers, she felt it, that wordless knowing that lived beneath language. She could sense his urgency, his fear. Not for himself, for her. The contradiction made her stomach twist. "You can't run into the forest at nightfall," he said, his voice low. Around them, guards shouted orders. "They'll hunt you, not because of what you are, because you're unprotected." She wrenched away. "I'm unprotected because you brought me into a room full of people who want me dead." "No." His jaw tightened. "Because I should have killed Thane the moment he opened his mouth." A long moment passed between them. His hand was still raised, where hers had been, as if the absence of her skin burned him too. She could feel the tension in him, the barely leashed animal beneath the crown, the part of him that wanted to tear apart anyone who threatened her. That should have terrified her. Instead, it steadied something in her chest. "Come with me," he said. "Not as a prisoner, as someone I'm protecting. You have my word." "Your word," she laughed, bitter and sharp. "Your word is worth what exactly Elder Ovid says Ironhide concealed the truth about Nightshade. That Ironhide knew where she went and said nothing. And Ironhide was your right hand, wasn't he? So what did you know? How long did you let her disappear?" His face went very still. Not the stillness of guilt, the stillness of a man who'd just been struck with a truth he couldn't deny. "Ironhide benefited from her absence." Selka continued, each word a small blade. "A moon guide who vanished meant no one to challenge his counsel, no one to see through his lies. So I need you to tell me, did you let that happen? Did you let my sister disappear because it was convenient?" He didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was stripped down to nothing but bone. "I didn't know where she went, but I should have demanded answers. I should have burned the kingdom looking for her. And yes, Ironhide benefited. He was the one who convinced me to stop searching. He said she'd gone to the deep forest by choice, that moon guides sometimes did, that forcing her back would violate something sacred." The confession hung in the cold air between them. Outside, the forest pressed against the stone walls, dark and waiting. "I believed him," Vale said. "Not because I was foolish, because I wanted to. Because a moon guide who'd chosen to leave meant I didn't have to confront what I'd failed to protect. And every year after, when the absence became normal, I stopped questioning it at all. That's worse than if I'd known. She could feel the truth of it radiating through the bond. Not an excuse, an admission. He wasn't asking for forgiveness. He was simply telling her what he'd done and what it had cost him. "They're coming," one of the guards called from inside the hall. "Lord Thane's moving toward the eastern wing." Vale's hand found hers again, and this time she didn't pull away. "We leave now, just you and me. We ride north to the old monastery. It's beyond the reach of the pack, and no one will follow if they think you've fled into the deep forest. You'll be safe there while I figure out what Thane wants and why he's risking a confrontation with an Alpha King." "And then what?" she asked. "Then we find out what happened to Nightshade. The real story, not Ironhide's version, not what anyone wanted to believe." He pulled her toward the stables. "I can't undo what I let happen, but I can do this. I can choose her and you over convenience." The rain started as they reached the horses, cold and relentless. Selka climbed into the saddle beside him, her fingers gripping the reins. The bond thrummed between them alive and undeniable. She didn't trust him. Not yet. But something in her recognized that he was telling her the truth about his failure, and maybe that was where trust had to begin. Not in certainty, but in the willingness to admit when you'd been wrong. They rode into the dark forest. Behind them, the great hall was already a ghost. Ahead, nothing but rain, and the sound of hoofbeats, and the constant aching pull of the bond that neither of them could break, even if they'd wanted to. The days that followed moved like a dream Selka couldn't quite wake from. The Alpha King had stopped hunting her. Instead, he was there in the great hall at dawn, watching her break bread with the servants. In the courtyard at dusk, his presence a quiet weight she felt before she ever saw him. She could feel the bond between them pulling tighter, a thread she couldn't cut even if she wanted to. And the terrible, terrifying thing was that she wasn't sure she wanted to anymore. One morning, a girl arrived at the gates. Her name was Sarah. She had the kind of beauty that made other women tired just looking at her dark curling hair, skin like cream, and a smile that lit up the great hall the moment she walked in. She was a healer, she said. Elder Ovid had sent her to help with the wounded, who still lingered from the battles before Vale took the throne. The Alpha King greeted her with courtesy, nothing more. But Selka watched the way his eyes lingered on her face for just a moment too long, and something inside her went cold. Sarah was kind. That was the worst part. She brought herbs to the sick sang while she worked, asked Selka genuine questions about her life before the castle. Within 2 days, they were sitting together in the herb garden, and Selka found herself telling Sarah things she hadn't meant to share. How strange it felt to be called Moon Guide, how the weight of the title pressed down on her shoulders, how the Alpha King confused her in ways she couldn't name. Sarah listened with her whole attention, her hand warm on Selka's arm. "He's not what you think," Sarah said one afternoon, her voice soft as she crushed dried flowers between her palms. "The Alpha King, I mean. He's been alone for so long. A wolf without a pack is just a beast, you know, but you could give him something real." Selka said nothing. She watched Sarah's hands move steady and practiced, and wondered if the healer knew something she didn't. The bond between them grew anyway. Vale began to speak to her not as a king to a subject, but as a man to a woman. He told her about the weight of the crown, about the promises he'd made to keep the kingdom whole. One evening in the great hall, he sat beside her on the stone bench, close enough that she could smell wood smoke and something wild underneath it, and he said, "The throne needs legitimacy. The elders whisper that I'm not truly fit to rule." A long moment passed between them. "But when you're near, I feel like I could be." Selka's heart twisted. She wanted to believe him. Part of her already did. Then came the night she overheard Sarah and the Alpha King speaking in the corridor outside his chambers. Selka had been walking back to her own room, her mind tangled with questions, when she heard Sarah's voice pitched low and urgent. "She's beginning to trust you," Sarah said. "That's all you needed, isn't it? Once the Moon Guide trusts the Alpha King, the kingdoms will fall in line." Elder Ovid said, "Sarah." Vale's voice cut through the darkness. "That's not..." But Selka didn't wait to hear the rest. She ran. Her feet carried her through corridors she barely recognized, down stone stairs that wound into shadow. Her breath came in sharp gasps. Had it all been a game? A strategy, wrapped in a voice that sounded like longing? She made it to the courtyard before he caught her. She could feel him before she saw him, that pull in the bond, and she spun around with her hands raised, like she could stop him just by force of will. "You were using me," she said. Her voice didn't shake. That surprised her. "You and Sarah and the elders. I'm just a tool to make your rule look legitimate." Vale stood in the moonlight, his chest rising and falling. For a long beat, he said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was rough. "Is that what you think?" "I know it," Selka said. But even as she spoke, she could feel the bond pulling at her, whispering that he was lying, or she was, or both of them were caught in something neither could control. "Then you don't know me at all," he said quietly. And the terrible part was that Selka realized she didn't. Not really. She'd let the bond fool her into thinking closeness was understanding. She'd mistaken the pull between them for love, when maybe it was just hunger. His hunger for a throne, made solid. Her hunger to be wanted. Sarah appeared in the doorway behind Vale, and when their eyes met, Selka saw something shift in the girl's face. Not guilt exactly. Something more complicated. A choice made and already regretted. Selka turned and walked back into the darkness alone. The night air carried the scent of rain and wood smoke when Selka found him alone in the courtyard. Vale stood with his back to her shoulders, tense, one hand braced against the stone wall. She could feel the bond pulling at her, that wordless knowing that said he was hurting, that something in him was fracturing. He'd been thrown from his horse during the hunt, a wound no physician could explain, not physical, not entirely. She moved closer. He didn't turn. "You're bleeding into yourself," she said quietly. "I can feel it." A long moment passed, then Vale's voice came rough. "You should go. This isn't safe for you." "Safe?" Selka almost laughed. "You think I came to you because I was afraid of being hurt?" She reached for him. Her hand found his shoulder, and the instant her skin met his, the bond flared between them like wildfire catching. Vale turned, and she saw it then. Not the Alpha King, not the powerful wolf whose name made lesser men bow. She saw a man who'd spent years building walls so high he'd forgotten what lay beneath them. Pain lived in his eyes. Real pain. The kind that didn't come from swords or teeth. "Tell me," she whispered. "I can't give you what you need," he said. "That's what Thane's been saying all along, isn't it? I'm not worthy of Nightshade's gift. I'm not worthy of you." Selka felt the fear in him like a living thing, and underneath it, something else, a desperate wanting. But he was holding back, terrified that if he let her see all of it, she'd turn away. She didn't speak. Instead, she closed her eyes and opened herself to the bond between them. It was reckless, dangerous. But Selka had learned something Elder Ovid never taught her. Purity wasn't weakness. It wasn't incapability. It was the right to choose mercy, even when you had the power to destroy. She let her healing flow through the bond. Vale gasped. His knees nearly buckled, and he gripped her arms to steady himself. The light that poured from her wasn't gentle. It was fierce, ancient, the power of the moon guide, awake and alive. She showed him she could see his wounds, the betrayals, the loneliness of an alpha who'd had to be unbreakable because his people needed him to be. She saw the moment he'd lost his first mate decades ago, and how that grief had calcified into something he couldn't name. She felt how much he wanted to be worthy of her, and how terrified he was that he never could be. And then he opened himself to her in return. Selka saw Vale as he truly was, not the legend, not the king. A wolf who'd spent so long protecting everyone else that he'd forgotten how to be protected. A man who loved her not because she was the moon guide, not because she could legitimize his throne or restore his power. He loved her because she was Selka, because she'd stood in the great hall and spoke truth to him when everyone else bowed, because she'd chosen to see him. The bond between them crystallized, deepened. It was almost unbearable. When it was over, they stood in the darkness, breathing hard, foreheads nearly touching. Vale's hands trembled as they held her. Selka could feel his heartbeat wild and alive. "I'm not asking you to be worthy," she said, her voice steady. "I'm asking you to be honest. Are you capable of that?" A long silence stretched between them. Vale pulled back just enough to meet her eyes. In that moment, he could have lied. He could have promised her anything. Instead, he said the only true thing that mattered. "I don't know yet, but I'm going to try." The doubt came first as a whisper. Selka stood in the chamber after Vale left her hand still warm from his touch, and something in her chest began to fray. Not the bond was steady pulling her toward him like moonlight on water, but her mind. Her mind was a different thing entirely. Sarah found her there. The younger woman moved through the doorway with that careful grace she'd perfected over months at court, and Selka felt a small relief at seeing a familiar face. They'd grown close during the long nights of preparation, hadn't they? Sarah had sat with her, through the doubts about the coronation had listened, when Selka confessed her fear that she wasn't strong enough for what was coming. "You look troubled," Sarah said, settling beside her on the stone bench. Selka said nothing for a long moment. The rain had started again outside, pattering against the narrow windows. "He loves me," Selka said finally. "I know he does, the bond. I can feel it, but I don't know if he loves me or if he loves what I can do for him." Sarah's expression shifted, just slightly, a tightening around the eyes. "Has he given you reason to doubt?" "No, not exactly." Selka turned to her. "But that's what makes it worse, isn't it? If he were cruel or obvious about it, I could dismiss him. Instead, he's everything I needed him to be." Sarah reached over and took her hand. The gesture was tender. It was also calculated. What Selka didn't know yet was that Lord Thane had been visiting Sarah for weeks, that he'd been filling her head with whispers about power, about how a woman like her could matter more than she ever had at Vale's side, that he'd shown her documents, old records yellowed with age, that proved something about Nightshade that Vale himself might not even know. "Come with me," Sarah said quietly. "There's something you need to see." The archive was cold, underground, lit by torches that threw uneven shadows across shelves of bound leather and crumbling parchment. Sarah led her to a corner that smelled of dust and time, and withdrew a single document from behind a loose stone. "Ironhide knew," Sarah said, and her voice had changed. It was harder now, more certain. "Before Vale was born, before the current Alpha King even took the throne, Ironhide knew that Nightshade's power, the power Vale carries, was supposed to be bound to the Moon Guide, not to strengthen the Alpha, to contain him, to keep him from becoming what his bloodline naturally is." Selka's hands shook as she took the parchment. The words blurred. Binding, restraint, guardian. The language was old but unmistakable. And there at the bottom, a signature she recognized from the oldest records, Ironhide's mark. "He never told Vale," Sarah continued. "Ironhide died keeping that secret, and now Vale stands on the throne with power he doesn't fully understand. And you're supposed to be his check, his balance, but he's made you believe you're his partner instead." Selka could feel the betrayal settling into her bones, not from Vale, not yet, but from the world itself, from the structure of everything she'd been told. She looked at Sarah with new eyes, and Sarah met her gaze without flinching. "I'm telling you this because you deserve to know what you're really bound to," Sarah said. "Because kindness without clarity is just another kind of blindness." The parchment crackled in Selka's grip. Outside the archive, somewhere in the great hall above them, the Alpha King moved through his day, unaware that the woman he loved now questioned whether he'd ever truly told her the truth at all. Selka's hand trembled as she stood over Sarah's broken form. The girl who had betrayed her, who had led her into Thane's trap, lay bleeding on the cold stone floor of the great hall. One word from Selka, and the guards would finish what the fall had started. One word. That was all it would take. The Alpha King stood motionless across the hall watching. Vale's jaw was locked tight. She could feel the bond between them humming with tension, with his wolf pushing against the surface, demanding she speak the sentence. The mate bond wanted what she wanted. It would give her that. It would let her have her revenge, and it would feel like love. A long moment passed. Selka looked down at Sarah's face, twisted in pain, eyes wide with the certainty of death. And something in her understood the trap wasn't the one Thane had set in the courtyard. The trap was this. The trap was believing that her power came from what she could destroy. "Get her to the healers," Selka said. The guards didn't move. They looked to Vale. She could feel it then, the Alpha King releasing his grip on the bond. He stepped back. He didn't command them forward, and he didn't order them to wait. He simply let go. The choice was hers alone now, untethered from his will, from his wolf, from the pull between them. "You heard her," Vale said quietly. "Move." The guards carried Sarah away. Her whimpers faded into the corridor. Selka stood in the emptiness of the great hall, and the silence felt heavier than any sentence of death could have been. Vale walked toward her slowly. His hands were open. His face was stripped of the crown of the power of the thing that made him the Alpha King. When he stopped a few paces away, he didn't reach for her through the bond. He didn't pull. He simply waited. "You could have made me want to kill her," Selka said. Her voice was steady, but it cost her. "You could have used the bond. I would have felt it. I would have believed it was my own rage." "I know," Vale said. "Why didn't you?" "Because I love who you are. Not what you can do. Not what you can give me or take from me." He paused, and his eyes held hers. "If I had to chain you to keep you, then I never had you at all." Selka could feel the truth of it moving through the bond, not as a command, not as a compulsion, but as a choice he'd already made. He had surrendered his right to possess her. He had set down the crown and picked up nothing in its place. She understood then what her power actually was. Not the ability to destroy, not the ability to be destroyed, but the choice to neither let pain hollow her out, nor let it turn her into something cruel, to stand in the wreckage of betrayal and choose mercy anyway. That was the thing that made her the moon guide. Not purity. Choice. She crossed the distance between them and took his hand. Selka stood in the archive chamber. Elder Ovid's words still hanging in the cold air. The scrolls before her told a story nobody had wanted her to know. Not Vale, not the council, not even her own family. Nightshade hadn't fallen because it was weak. It had fallen because the moon guide, who ruled there generations ago, made a choice. She chose to leave, to take her power, and walk away from the wolf world, entirely leaving it to tear itself apart. A long moment passed. Selka's hands trembled as she read the final entry. The moon guide had written it herself, her handwriting shaky but deliberate. "I cannot heal a kingdom that refuses to heal itself. I will not spend my gift on those who only want dominion." She had sealed the borders, forbidden any wolf from following her into the hidden lands, and for 3 centuries that sanctuary had remained closed while the Alpha Kingdoms outside fought over scraps of power and territory. Elder Ovid watched from the doorway. "Your family knows," he said quietly. "Not the full truth, perhaps, but they know Nightshade exists. They know what your ancestor did." Selka turned on him. "Then why didn't they tell me? Why let me think I was some kind of legend, some answer to everything?" "Because," Ovid said, stepping closer, "if you knew that the last moon guide abandoned her people, you might do the same. Your family needs you to stay. They need you to be different from her." The words struck deeper than any blade. Selka sank into a chair, the weight of it finally clear. Her family hadn't protected her out of love alone. They'd kept her isolated, kept her ignorant, because they were terrified she would make the same choice, walk away, seal the borders, leave them to their own ruin. 2 days later, her father came to the great hall where she waited. He looked smaller than she remembered older. Behind him came her mother, her sister, the elders who had raised her. They knew she'd found the archive. "Nightshade was not a paradise," her father said. His voice didn't apologize. It stated fact. It was a kingdom like any other. Your ancestor chose to abandon it because she believed the cost of saving it was too high. We chose differently. We chose to stay, to fight, to survive without her gift. You chose to lie to me, Selka said. We chose to raise you without the burden of her shame, her mother corrected. You are not her. You were never meant to be. But that was the problem, wasn't it? Selka could feel the anger now. Not the hot, destructive kind, but something sharper, cleaner. She had the right to that anger. She had the right to rage at being used, at being shaped into a tool. The question was what she would do with it. She looked at them, her family. The people who had imprisoned her with good intentions. I won't become her, Selka said. But I won't become you either. Not if it means lying to myself about what I am. Outside, the wind carried the scent of snow. Somewhere in the distant mountains, Nightshade waited, behind sealed borders. And somewhere closer, the Alpha King was waiting too. And so Selka stood in the great hall, with two paths laid before her, and neither one felt like freedom. Ironhide's voice still echoed in her mind. The Moon Guide was a tool for order, for keeping the wolf world from tearing itself apart. A cage dressed up as purpose. But when she turned that logic over, she found Nightshade's voice underneath it. The Moon Goddess had hidden herself away for centuries, rather than face the cost of her own power. She'd let wars happen, let her own people suffer. And that silence, that absence, was its own kind of betrayal. A long moment passed. Selka said nothing. Elder Ovid watched her from across the stone floor. He'd been waiting for this, the moment when she'd realize that both factions had used her name to justify their own choices. Ironhide wanted to cage her. Nightshade wanted her to vanish. Neither one had ever asked what Selka herself wanted to be. You're waiting for me to choose a side, Selka said quietly. Her voice carried no anger, only a kind of tired clarity, as if one of them is pure and the other corrupt. Ovid's expression didn't change. Is that not the choice before you? No. She turned toward him fully. The choice before me is whether I let someone else's story become my own. She could feel the weight of the title. Moon Guide, Moon Goddess, Keeper of Balance, pressing down like a stone. It was real. The power was real. The wolf world did look to her for something. But she'd spent so long running from what Ironhide wanted her to be that she'd almost accepted Nightshade's alternative without question. Hide. Disappear. Let someone else carry the burden. That wasn't freedom either. Selka walked towards the great hall's edge, where the stone archway opened onto the courtyard beyond. Rain fell outside, steady and cold. She could smell the wet earth, the iron tang of the torches being lit in the distance. I won't be Ironhide's weapon, she said. Her voice was steady now. And I won't be Nightshade's ghost. I won't hide what I am, and I won't let anyone else decide what that means. And what does it mean? Ovid's question was almost gentle. Almost. Selka turned back to face him. I don't know yet, but I'm going to find out for myself. It wasn't defiance for its own sake. It was something quieter and more dangerous, the refusal to be owned. Not by the Alpha King, not by the elders, not even by the weight of ancient goddesses who'd made their own choices and left the consequences for others to clean up. She could sense something shifting in the great hall. The air itself seemed to hold its breath. This wasn't the answer anyone had prepared for. It was the only one that mattered. The great hall fell silent the moment Selka stepped through the archway. Not the silence of respect. The silence of a room holding its breath. She did not summon her power. She simply walked. The Alpha King stood at the far end, his hands still raised from the moment before, the moment he'd tried to shield her, and she'd chosen to stand alone. Vale's eyes followed her. She could feel them on her skin like heat, like a question she wasn't ready to answer yet. Lord Thane was there. Of course he was. His face had gone the color of old ash when the doors opened, when he saw her moving through the crowd of gathered wolves and courtiers, with her head level and her hands open. Not trembling, not broken. Elder Ovid stood near the throne. His expression hadn't changed, but something in him had shifted, a recognition maybe, or a reckoning. Selka stopped in the center of the great hall. The space between her and Thane was maybe 20 feet. Not far enough to hide what she was about to do. You said Ironhide concealed the truth about Nightshade, she said. Her voice didn't shake. that the Alpha King's bloodline was compromised, that I was a placeholder for legitimacy. She paused. A long moment. You were right. He did conceal it. I've seen the records, the sealed documents in the Moon Court archives, the ones you knew about. Thane's jaw tightened. But here's what you didn't say. Selka turned slightly, addressing not just him, but everyone. The gathered pack, the courtiers, the Alpha King himself. Ironhide concealed it because he loved his son, because Vale was never the mistake. The mistake was the lie, the silence, and you've been using that silence like a weapon, not to protect the crown, but to poison it. She could feel the bond between her and Vale now, not pulling her toward him, just present, like a door she'd left unlocked. I could destroy you for this, she said to Thane, and she meant it. The power was there, coiled in her chest, waiting. She could unmake him, make the entire kingdom watch as she did it. They'd cheer. I could use what I am to burn you down and call it justice. A long silence stretched across the hall. But I'm not going to. Selka's voice was steady. I'm going to tell the truth instead, out loud, in front of everyone. And I'm going to let the kingdom decide what that means, not because I'm weak, because I'm not going to let hatred decide who I become. She turned to face the Alpha King then, just for a moment, long enough for him to see that her eyes were clear. That's the difference, she said quietly, between a moon guide who is just a title and one who actually chooses it. Around them, the great hall seemed to hold its breath, not the silence of fear, but the silence of a kingdom holding its breath. Selka stood in the center of that vast stone room, her hands still glowing faintly with the power of the moon power she had chosen not to use to destroy, but to reveal. Every noble, every guard, every lord who had plotted in shadows now faced the truth she had forced into the open. The light was fading from her palms. She let it go. Vale moved toward her, slowly. His eyes, those sharp, calculating eyes that had always seen her as a prize, a legitimacy, a tool, were different now. He stopped a few paces away. A long moment passed between them, neither speaking. The bond still pulled at her, that wordless knowing that lived in her bones, but it was quieter now, clearer. She could feel the difference between what the mate bond demanded and what she actually chose. They were not the same thing. They had never been the same thing. You didn't destroy them, he said. His voice was rough, almost uncertain. No, she said nothing more. You could have. He paused. The power was there. I know. Selka looked at him directly. I could have burned this kingdom to ash and remade it in my image. I could have made you kneel. I could have taken everything. She exhaled. But that would have made me the very thing I came here to stop. Elder Ovid stepped forward from the crowd, his weathered face unreadable. Behind him, Lord Thane stood rigid, stripped of his authority, his lies exposed to everyone he had tried to control. The guardsman with the scarred jaw. Sarah's father watched from the shadows, his expression closed. Sarah herself was nowhere in the great hall. She had fled hours ago, when the light came, when she understood that her betrayal had been witnessed by the very power she had tried to use. Selka did not hunt her. That was the choice. That was the restraint. The moon guide does not belong to the throne, Elder Ovid said quietly. His words carried the weight of someone who understood the cost of what had just happened. That is the old law, the old order. It was never a law, Selka said. It was a cage, and I'm breaking it. Vale's jaw tightened. She could see him working through it. The political loss, the legitimacy he had believed was bound to her, the power structure that had depended on her being bound to him. He had loved her. She believed that now. But he had also loved the idea of her, the symbol, the proof that his rule was blessed. What happens now, he asked. Selka turned to the assembled court. The moon guide walks freely. I will help this kingdom when I choose to, how I choose to. I will not be owned. I will not be guarded or claimed or inherited like property. She paused. That is not a threat. That is a boundary. Vale was quiet for a long beat. Then he nodded, once sharp, accepting. It cost him something. She could see it in the tightness around his eyes. but he did it anyway. "Then I will build a throne that does not need to possess you," he said. "A kingdom that earns your choice, not one that demands it." It was not a declaration of love. It was something harder, a commitment to let her be separate from him,